Base, 6 lines down the page. At the 2 dots. So we began yesterday. We're obviously discussing Yud, and the first exhibit of Yud. The question here is, what does Yud do? Does Yud make Kiddushin or does it make Nisuin? In other words, do we look at the mechira, the actual sale of the Ameh Ivriya to be the Kiddushin, and the Yud goes sort of straight into Nisuin or not? And the Gemara takes some interesting ways to try to resolve this. So Yid Nisuin Isa Erison. Does it make Nisuin or does it make Erison? Nafkamina. What's the difference? Obviously, all the differences between regular Erison and Nisuin, which typically are the Yarshut to inherit her, the Tamala, if he's a Kayan, to become Tameh to her. Kayan only becomes Tameh to his wife, Nisuin, not Erison. Ulahafin the Rat to nullify her vows once they're Nisuin, once they are married, then he can nullify her vows. Before Nisuin, he needs the partnership of the father. What's the story? Says the Gemara Toshma, the big debate. So yesterday, if you remember, we had the debate, which was the word bibigdai is written differently than it's pronounced, and that's because it's a chirik on the second base. So if it was spelled what we call mole, complete, it would be actually base yud gimel dalet vav. The way it's pronounced is as if there's a yud. In other words, bibigda means begida, being a traitor. Boged is the traitor. And but it's written in the Torah without the yud, which makes it presume that the same word is beged, clothing, beveged ba. So what's the beged? Kivan shapir shalitzi Allah shuv ein rishar l'maycha. This is the opinion of Rabbi Kiva. According to Rabbi Kiva, once the master marries her, he spreads his clothing over her, which is a loose expression for marriage. Shuv ein rishar l'maycha. He has the father does not have a right to sell her. Hold on. Zvunu d'lem mizaven lo. Okay, specifically, according to Rabbi Kiva, the father does not have a right to sell her after Yud, because that would be what we call shifchus achar ishus, selling her for a slave once she's already been married. But to marry her off again, he could marry her off again. 1 second. But if you'll say that Yud makes Nisuin, once she's married, and this is true generally speaking of all girls or young women, anyone under the age of 12 and a half years old, once their father marries them off and there's Nisuin, the father has no more control over them. When she leaves the husband's house by divorce or death of the husband, then there's no control of the father. So if that's the case, how could he marry her off again? He can't marry her off again because he doesn't have control over her. Even this is Shuvain Lavi Rishuspa. Once she's married, the father has no domain over her, and therefore can't marry her off again. Elalav Shmamina, it must be that Erison Isa. It makes Erison and not Nisuin. So that's the first proof. Amr of Nachman Yitzchak Hacha b'Kiddushin da'alma koi. We're talking here about a regular Kiddushin. Okay, in other words, it's true that the big deva is certainly. Let me get the full verse here. There it is. We should really go through it together. I'll just read it to you. If she was wicked, we'll soon see why the Torah uses that word. It's an interesting word to use. And because of that he didn't want, because she was wicked in his eyes, he didn't want to do yud. The hefta, and Double check this. Hold on a second. Sure. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, is a creating sin? Okay. So in Rob, if she was wicked in the eyes of the master, Asher loy yada, it's spelled as he will do yid, but it's actually understood to mean loy with an aleph. So and he did not do yid to her. The hefta, and then he has to provide the opportunity for her to redeem herself. And then he can't sell her again because of his begida in her. And bibigdeba, according to Rabbi Kiva, means because bibigdeba means that if the master has done yud, then the father can't sell her again. Now, according to Rav Nachman saying that bibigdeba actually doesn't refer directly to yud. It refers to any type of begida. Now, begida here again is actually bibigda. It means with clothing, i.e. marriage. In other words, if the father sells her, but gives her for Kiddushin, if the father gives her for Kiddushin, so then he can't sell her again. He can't sell her as a slave. And that means that doesn't refer to Kiddushin Yud. It could be Yud goes straight into Nesuin. The question here is not about Yud, it's about every Kiddushin. Every Kiddushin in the context of Kiddushin, not Nesuin. So once the father gives her bibigdai, which according to Rabbi Kiva is understood as bibeged, meaning the father gave her over for Kiddushin, then if the father gives her over for Kiddushin, he can't sell her to be a slave again. Okay. If the father gave her over Kiddushin, he can't sell her again. But halfway down, Toshma is the last word of the line.
Okay.
First one was Ein Meichler. Toshma, Ein Meichler Lekroivim. You can't sell her to relatives. We'll learn about this more today. You can't sell her to relatives. And obviously, you might imagine that one of the problems here is that does she need to be does mechiras amavriya, the selling of your daughter as an amavriya, does that include must she be eligible for yiud for the mechira to be valid? Obviously, with a relative, she's not eligible for yiud, right? Because there's an error there. So is this permitted? Mishum Rabbi Eliezer says, you could sell it to a relative. Bishav and everyone agrees, you can sell her almana l'kain gadol, grush v'chalutza l'kain hedyet, or a divorcee or a chalutza to a kain hedyet. Okay, now here's the big problem. Hi almana hechidami. How in the world is it possible for her to be an almana and for you to sell her? If she accepted Kiddushin, almana kari law, obviously she's not an almana because her Kiddushin is not valid. Ella what? The elder kitcha avia. The father accepted Kiddushin. If the father accepted Kiddushin, mimatzim is avin. A person cannot sell his daughter to shifchus after he sold his daughter as wife. And again, the key here is it has to do with the father, because the father married her off. Therefore, the father cannot. He can't sell her. He can't sort of use her twice. Once for Kiddushin, then as a slave. Okay, so what's the resolution? How in the world is it possible to have a girl who you potentially could sell to a kohen gadol? You could sell. She's an almana. She's a widow, but you could also sell her to a kohen gadol as a slave, even though the kohen gadol can't do yiyud. How is such a scenario possible? As soon as you give her a Kiddushin, you can't sell her again. Amr says the name of Rabbi Yitzchak. We have a simple resolution here. We're talking here about Yud, and it was done according to Rabbi Yehudah. The Amr Moitz Yoshanis Lav Kiddushin. Okay, so let's explain this. Basically, as follows: the concept here is that it's sort of the father sold her, therefore the father can't. The father gave her for Kiddushin, therefore the father can't sell her again. We're about 2/3 down the page. We're at the Amrit. About 10 lines down from the bottom of the page. Okay, now the father sold her. The father sold her for Kiddushin, and father can't sell it because the father sold her for Kiddushin. The father can't sell her again as a slave. Now, father sold her as a slave, and we say that Yud is not that the original money is Kiddushin money, but that Yud is at this point the rest of the value of her turns into Kiddushin. So in other words, the master has a right to make her work for the next year or so, let's say. So that money turns into Kiddushin. If that's the case, the Kiddushin here is not the father's money, but it's actually the girl herself is doing the Kiddushin. If she's doing the Kiddushin herself, so then the father is allowed to sell her as a slave again. Because over here, it's not the father that gave her for Kiddushin. The father didn't give her for Kiddushin. The father let her choose her Kiddushin at the decision of the Adin, the master. So therefore, because the Kiddushin was facilitated by the girl herself, not by the father, therefore it's not considered the father's problem, and the father could sell her to a slave even after she's been a wife. Okay, now, what exactly does Yid do? The Iyam with Nisuin, if you say that Yid makes Nisuin, Kivan Shenisis Shuv Ein Lavi Rishuspa. Once she's married, the father has no domain over her at all. So therefore, Elamai must be Erison. It must be that Yud makes Erison. And that's how that is the difference between why what's unique about Kiddushin of Yud is that it's the girl's Kiddushin, and that's why the father could sell her again as a slave. The Gemara asks, but hold on a second. But 1 second, didn't we learn that a person cannot sell his daughter after she got married? It must Elamayas Lachamemar. What are you going to respond? Which is what I already told you. Shiny Eris and Yidam Eris and Davia. There's a difference between whether her father gave her Kiddushin, accepted Kiddushin on her behalf, or she accepted Kiddushin on her behalf. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, well, maybe the same logic would apply to Nisuin. I feel the time in Nisuin, I say shiny Nisuin Yidam Nisuin Davia. Maybe Yud actually makes a Nisuin, but because she facilitated the Nisuin, not her father, in the case of Yud, where she marries the master, maybe in that scenario, maybe her Nisuin is different than her father's Nisuin. And in the case where she marries herself, the father does have rights over her, even after the husband dies. So the Gemara says, "Hi, Mai." That doesn't make any sense. Bishlam Eris and Shiny. It would make sense that Erison would be different because it's dependent on who sold her, who caused her to get into a state of Erison. Was it the father or was it her? So it makes sense to say that the father's right to sell her is dependent on the fact that he previously sold her. Ultimately speaking, the Nisuin is the complete relationship with the husband, and it shouldn't really make much of a difference how that relationship was facilitated, and therefore it does. Therefore, it does make a difference. If the girl herself did the Erison, then the father could sell her again. If the father did the Erison, he cannot. And so far we've proved that Yud, the marriage of the master to his Alma Ha'ivriya, is Erison and not Nisuin. Nisuin would have to come afterwards. First he would do Yud, that would be Kiddushin. and afterwards he would do Nisuin. So the Gemara asks, okay, according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, the Amar Afilu Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehudah Moiser Shaynis LeKiddushin Itnu b'Maimukim Law. So this all makes sense if we're starting off the Gemara by saying that actually it's not the father that gives the Kiddushin, because we say Moiser Shaynis Lav LeKiddushin Itnu. The sale of the Amah Ivriya is not the money of Kiddushin. Like we said, there's two ways of looking at the Kiddushin. Do we look at the Kiddushin, that the Kiddushin was paid out immediately, and it's just the option of the husband at any point to recognize that? Or do we say, no, the Kiddushin actually is the amount of money left in her slavery that turns into Kiddushin? What's the difference? The difference is as follows. Let's say she's sold for $600 a year, okay, and 6 years, $100 a year, it's 30 cents a day. And it's halfway through the last day, there's only 15 cents. And let's say 15 cents is less than a Shava Pruta. So if we say that the Kiddushin money is the first money, that's fine. You can still marry her because that money was more than a Shava Pruta. But if it's the remaining amount of value that's the Kiddushin, because it's less than Shava Pruta, you can't marry her. And we'll discuss that. We'll discuss that more soon. Now, there is an opinion that says that even according to Rabbi Yehudah, everybody agrees that the first money, the money that you bought the Amar Ivriya with, is the Kiddushin money. If that's the case, then how in the world, getting back to the original question, how does he find a scenario where you can have an almana, a widow, that's being sold to a Kohen Gadol? In other words, it's the father's Kiddushin, and the father is not allowed to sell his daughter for slavery, indentured servitude, after he married her off. So the Gemara says, "Mukum la Rabbi Eliezer, Amol shifus achar shifras hud le'matzim zavan la, Amol shifus achar ishus matzim zavan la." He would explain this price according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says you can't sell her for a shifra twice, but you could sell her for a shifra after you've already married her off. And according to that opinion, indeed, it would not be conclusive whether or not Yud is Kiddushin or Nisuin. Sorry, it would be. I'm sorry, no, that it would be just as conclusive. It would still be conclusive that it would have to be Erusin and not Nisuin. Okay, next question. Barish Lakish. Mahu shmiyayit adam l'bnei kotan. Can a so like we said before, a master could do Yud. He could also do his son. Could also do Yud. The question is, does the son need to be an adult or not? His son, meaning any type of son. Just like he's an adult, his son is also an adult, and his son has to wait until adulthood before he can marry this girl. Amr Zera says, Tashma, let's see. This verse is referring to an adulterer and a woman who's committed adultery. Ish, a man, has to commit the adultery, prat lekoton, that it means if a child commits adultery, there's no penalty. Ashar yena, if it's eshes ish, who has niyuf, an adulterous affair with a married woman, prat leeshes koton, eshes ish here means the wife of a man. That excludes leeshes koton, the wife of a premature male. The iyam miyayid, if to say that yid works and came at seeing eshes lekoton, well, then we do see that it's possible for a young man to marry a woman, a young boy to marry a woman. Okay, and therefore there should be a penalty. So Gemara says 1 second. Contrary, velamai. So what are you going to say? Einamiyayit. You can't do yid. Why is the Torah telling me that the wife of a child, the wife of a boy, is not included in the laws of adultery? In other words, if a person has an adulterous affair with a woman married to a boy, it's not considered adultery. Then if it's not possible for a boy to marry a woman, then why does the Torah need to exclude it? There's no marriage here in the first place. I might come by like Tifshim, well, it must be from here to the contrary. The miyai that Yid actually does work. You could marry her, but the Torah says there is no penalty for the marriage. In other words, if somebody violates the marriage, if a man violates the marriage by having an adulterous affair with the woman, there's no penalty. Okay, so it would seem that the yud would work. So Rav Ashi, no. Rav Ashi says we can have a different scenario. Okay, so in general, under I don't know the factual realities of this situation, but certainly in Talmud, a 9-year-old is considered mature enough that if he engages in an act of intimacy, it's considered carnal. By a girl, the age is 3 years old. Less than 3 years old, we don't consider it to be a carnal act. In this sense that there is we legally view this as an act of intercourse. Okay, therefore, if the yavam, if the boy is under the age of 9 and he has a relationship with the yavama, it is not carnal, and therefore he does not acquire the yavama. But if he's over the age of 9, that midaraisa, we said, like we said before, yavama, any act of intercourse suffices for kinyan, even if there's no knowledge at all, like a 9-year-old, which does not have what we would call knowledge, even if he's very smart and intelligent. Okay, so I would think even in the rice since biblically speaking they can get married, and his act of intercourse is carnal. Whoever has an affair with her is chayiv, meaning they're liable for having an affair with a married woman. Kamash Malon, therefore the Torah says that no, a woman married to a boy, even if the marriage is legal, or whatever, in sort of any sense, there would be no penalty. Okay, my havala. So what's the final resolution? Can a person do? Can a yud be done with a person's premature child, boy? Can a person give his boy for yud to his maidservant? Amar of Evu, Amar of Yanai. Rav Evu says in the name of Yanai, this is very clear. And yud ela begodol. Yud must be with an adult. And yud ela midas. Yud must be with knowledge. We'll have to explain that. Now, it's obvious if there's the Gemara here asks Tarti, both. In other words, if you say that yud must be with somebody who's of an adult mind, well, obviously that excludes a child. So why does he need to say it is 2 separate requirements? So the Gemara says, "Matam cover, matam ein yud el begodol fish ein yud el midas." The reason why yud must be with an adult is because there must be an adult mind involved in the act. The Bayasema, alternatively, my midas. What does midas mean? Midas didah. One second. My midas didah. Okay. Another possibility is that the word midas here doesn't mean with an adult mind, but it means with her awareness. The Tani Abaya Breder Bavu, Abaya, the son of Bavu, said, "Ashalo yada." Again, this is again okay. It's actually spelled Ashalo with a vav, but okay, it means with it's pronounced with an aleph. That's what it means. Ashalo yada. The master did not do yud. Melamed should tzarach liyada. We learn from here that there is a mitzvah, positive commandment to do yud. One second. I'm sorry. Malam shetzarach liyada means that he must inform her, let her know that he's doing yud. He explains that this refers to Kedusha Yud, meaning that when he makes Kedusha Yud, he has to let her know that he's making Kedusha Yud. According to the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah, that says that the money of the sale is not the money of Kiddushin. It's the value remaining of her slavery, of her servitudes, that is the Kiddushin. And therefore he must let her know and inform her that money is being converted into Kiddushin. If the money of Kiddushin was the first money, meaning the money of the sale, you don't have to let her know. You can just let the father know. it's obviously the father's Kiddushin. No, because that's not the money, it's the value that's left over, therefore you have to tell her. Even if you'll say that it's the father's Kiddushin money, according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, we're saying that no, even if it's the father's Kiddushin money, and technically speaking, if the father marries off his daughter, accepts Kiddushin on behalf of his daughter, the father has no obligation to tell his daughter. Probably should, otherwise his daughter may be messed over for life if he dies without telling anybody. But probably should, But in the case of Amah Ivriya, the master is obligated to tell the Amah Ivriya because that's what the Torah says. If you do Yud, tell her you're doing Yud. Okay, my Rabbi Yehudah. This question of Moiser Shainis Kiddushin, what exactly is that? The Tanya we learned. The verse states Ya'ada v'hefta. The verse is talking about Asher lo Ya'ada. He did not do Yud. V'hefta, he provides the opportunity for redemption. So we have Yud and a v'hefta, two things. Says Rabbi Yehudah, the Tanya Ya'ada v'hefta tzar she'yeheshaz b'yam k'dei p'tiyah. When you want to do Yud is only possible when v'hefta is possible, when you could redeem it. Mikana Rabbi Yossi, from here Rabbi Yossi says, if it's the last day of her slavery and there's not even a shava pruta left of value to her work before she goes free, then you can't do Yud. Alma Kasavar, obviously from here we see that he holds we see that the first money, the monies that were given to the father, were not given for Kiddushin. And that's, so what is the Kiddushin? The remaining value. That's what it has to be, a remaining value in order for the Kiddushin to work. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar, afilu teim al Kiddushin, it knew shiny hachad amar rachman v'hefta. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, which is Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak we saw 5 minutes ago, he says no. It could be that Rabbi Yehudah holds that Ma'aser Shens the Kiddushin it knew. However, shiny hachad amar rachman v'hefta. However, the Torah says that whenever you yield, there has to be the opportunity of a hefta. Not because otherwise there's no money of Kiddushin, but because that's Xeris HaKosov, that's the Torah decided. Yud only works when redemption is possible. And because redemption is not possible because it's less than Shava Pruta, you can't do Yud. And that's irrespective of which money the Kiddushin is. That's the din, that's the law. It's not because the law defines the mechanism of how it takes place. I.e., the mechanism would be whether it's the first money for Kiddushin or whether it's the value of the slavery for Kiddushin. Nachman is saying that that's independent of the other question, which is Yud, that Yud must be done at a time where redemption is possible. Amr of Nachman. Rav says the name of Nachman. Amr Adon Levitik Tana. A person could say to his young daughter, go out and accept Kiddushin. In other words, typically it's the father's responsibility. Over here, he gives that responsibility to his daughter. How do we know this? Rabbi Yehudah, just like Rabbi Yehudah. Lavam Rabbi Yehudah, Ma'aser Shenis Lava Kiddushin etnu. Rabbi Yehudah says the first money is not Kiddushin. Therefore, what really happens here? The father, in effect, is giving over to the master his right of Kiddushin. So too, the father, because in other words, the father is giving the master selling the master the right for Kiddushin, and his daughter the ability to accept it. So we see that he can hand over that capacity to his daughter. And therefore, if he wants, he can tell his daughter to accept Kiddushin from whoever she wants. Rav says in the name of Nachman, somebody gives Kiddushin from a loan that has a mashkin, there's a collateral, the Kiddushin is valid from Rabbi Yehudah. Let's explain this. According to Rabbi Yehudah, the money is not Kiddushin. The money of the sale. What's happening? Her obligation to work for 6 years constitutes a loan, and she is the collateral to fulfill that loan. The indebtedness of working for 6 years is the loan. She herself is the collateral. And therefore, if there's at least a penny left to the collateral, meaning there's a penny left, there's a whatever, a dime or a quarter left to her work time. So then, and she's the collateral. That works for Kiddushin. You can give her Kiddushin with that value, and because she's the collateral, so there's collateral over the loan. That would be similar to giving her giving her Kiddushin over a similar type of relationship where she owes you money, she's given collateral, she's almost paid it up, but there's still a little bit of money left, where the remaining amount of money could be converted into Kiddushin money. Even though typically you cannot give Kiddushin for giving a loan, but where there's a collateral on the loan, then it's permitted and it works. Okay, next Gemara. How exactly does yid work? Very simple. You tell her in front of two people, witnesses. You are Mekudeshes to me. You're Erison to me. Even at the end of the 6 years. Even immediately prior to sundown. Sundown obviously is when she'd be free. Obviously, this opinion disagrees with Rabbi Yehudah, which we'll see in a moment. And like we saw previously, you must treat her like a wife, not like a maidservant. She gets every privilege and every right and deserves every type of treatment that a person would treat his regular wife. And if he's polygamous and decides to take another wife, he's not allowed to differentiate between them. Okay. Rabbi Yehudah says, "Im yeshas the yem telasing mashava pruta mekudeshes, im lav ein mekudeshes." 1 second. If there is time in the day, the lasting mashava pruta. So this is Rabbi Yehudah. We saw. If there is remaining to her slavery at least enough time that that there's a shava pruta, some amount of value to her work, then the Kiddushin is valid. Otherwise, v'mlav ein Kiddushin, it's not valid. It's a very interesting Talmudical technique that we'll see here. The Gemara is bringing the mashal. Mashal is typically a parable, but over here it's not really a parable. It's actually drawing a conclusion. The Gemara is going to try to understand this. There's a few examples here. Okay, so we have this debate, and then the Gemara says a conclusion from here. An example to this is somebody who tells a woman, I'm marrying you today after 30 days. And what happens? And somebody went ahead and somebody else went ahead. So let's say Reuben said, I'm giving you Kiddushin today, September 1st, and it should work after 30 days. And then somebody else, Shimon, came along September 15th and gave her a second Kiddushin. She's married to the first one, not to the second one. Why? The critical thing is because he said Me'achshav. The Kiddushin works now. It's September 1st. So because of that, the second Kiddushin is to a married woman, and it's not valid. So Gemara says, who exactly is this conclusion being drawn from? Rabbi Yehudah. If this conclusion is being drawn from Rabbi Yehudah, Rabbi Yehudah says the opposite. Rabbi Yehudah says that Amma Ivriya is not a Kiddushin at the first moment. It's Kiddushin all the way when it actually happens. That would be at the end. The mashal here, the conclusion here is being drawn from the rabbis. The rabbis said you can give a Kiddushin up to the last second. Why? Because they learn the money that you sold, the slave was sold for, that was Kiddushin money. If that was Kiddushin money, that's Kiddushin now at the time you sell the Am Ivriya to go into effect at a later point whenever you want, at the discretion of the master. And that's very similar to Me'achshav now, La'achar Shleshim Yom, after 30 days. Gemara says, this would seem to be obvious. I would think that Amah Ivriya, you never say Me'achshav. According to the rabbis, it's understood that every Amah Ivriya is a statement of Me'achshav. It's a statement that it works immediately after 30 days. Every Amah Ivriya, it works immediately at the moment of sale, at the discretion at a later point of the master, according to the rabbi's opinion, without saying the word Me'achshav. Whereas by a regular person, he must say the words Me'achshav. So I would think maybe you should learn from Ivriya, and it's not necessary to say Me'achshav. You presume it means Me'achshav. The Kiddushin should be in effect immediately. Kamashmalan, no, the Kiddushin is not in effect immediately. The Kiddushin is not in effect immediately, and unless you specifically mention me'achshav. In other words, okay. Tanya idach, another brayso, similar idea. Hamaychar is bita v'holach v'kitchel la'achar. Somebody sells daughter. And else. This is interesting. So again, the father from Shimon. Yeah, you're looking at me. That's exactly what happened. Chutzpah, right? You sold her for a slave, and then you're marrying her off to some second guy. What's going on here?
Sounds like a kind of 3-card Monty scam.
Yeah. He did absolutely. This is a game. The guy is playing a game of the master. Says Rabbi Yehudah, Sichak ba'odin mikudeshes l'sheni. He's made fun of the master, i.e., he's tricked the master, and the halacha is the Kiddushin works for Shimon, and the master is tough luck. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. This makes sense according to Rabbi Yehudah. Why? Because Kiddushin doesn't start. According to Rabbi Yehudah, Kiddushin only happens later, when it actually happens, as opposed to the Rabbanon, where Kiddushin happens immediately. Me'achshav. So according to the rabbis, you have no right to take Kiddushin. It's the privilege, it's the domain of the husband. It was already done. It's a done deal. You've already agreed to it at the moment you sold her. According to Rabbi Yehudah, you never agreed to it. Or maybe you did agree, but it doesn't, it only happens when it happens. And therefore it didn't happen yet.
Clearly Dad's going to be skipping down in a hurry.
That could be. The rabbis say, if he wants to, the master wants to do yiyud, he could do yiyud because the father had no right to give her to Kiddushin for Shimon. An example of this is a person who says to a woman, the Kiddushin should be after 30 days. He did not say the word me'achshav. Somebody else came along during the 30 days and gave her Kiddushin. The second guy's Kiddushin is valid because the Kiddushin was only supposed to happen after 30 days, and this guy gave Kiddushin beforehand. So the Gemara says, Mashal Aman. Who is this Mashal? Who's this conclusion being drawn from? If it's being drawn from the rabbis, the rabbis say, that if he wants to do yud, he could do yud. So according to the rabbis, clearly, one second. According to the rabbis, if he wants to do yid, he could. Meaning that by Amavriya, actually, he in a similar scenario, the second husband, the second guy, which is the husband, the guy who the father of Kiddushin does not have a right to marry her. It's the domain of the husband. So Mara says, you're right, Mashal Rabbi Yehudah, the conclusion is being drawn from Rabbi Yehudah. According to Rabbi Yehudah, the master's right to Kiddushin, the Kiddushin itself of the master doesn't happen until it actually happens. It's not like a me'achshav that happens at the time of the sale, according to Rabbi Yehudah. Pshita, that seems to be obvious. Even though Amavriya, you don't specifically mention that the Kiddushin should take place after 30 days, meaning at the time the Kiddushin should not take place. Amavriya, you just sell her. 1 second. In other words, Amavriya, the case is always that it's the Kiddushin. You could give Kiddushin, but it will only be valid when you actually give it. In the case of Amavriya, which is yud. However, in the case of Achar Shlashim Yom, 1 second. In the case where you marry a woman Achar Shlashim Yom, in other words, the message here is that if you don't say me'achshav, it actually doesn't work. It only works after 30 days and not me'achshav. And not saying me'achshav is going to have an impact. In other words, you might think that if you didn't, that maybe we should just always presume that this means me'achshav. When you marry off, when you give Kiddushin after 30 days, what you really mean is now after 30 days. So Kamash Malon, that no. According to Rabbi Yehudah, the Kiddushin is valid after 30 days, which means if somebody comes first, in between now and 30 days and gives her Kiddushin, because he did not say Me'achshav, that second Kiddushin is valid. Okay, have a great day.
Still think that there's